Everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and welcome to the ABNY Young Professionals Boardroom Breakfast with First Deputy Public Advocate Nick E. Smith. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us, and we're so excited to hear from the First Deputy Public Advocate about his career path, vision for New York City, and the important work he's doing at the Office of the Public Advocate. Before I pass over the screen, I'd like to welcome our young professional host, Deputy Manhattan Borough President Matthew S. Washington. Matthew was appointed the Deputy BP in September 2016, and prior to that, he served as Deputy Director at Friends of Hudson River Park, Executive Director of Friends of the High School of Environmental Studies, and Deputy Director of External Affairs at the Durst Organization. We feel lucky to have him as a member of our ABNY YP Steering Committee. Thank you so much to the Deputy Borough President, and a huge thank you to Deputy Public Advocate Nick E. Smith for speaking with us today. Please remember to share and promote the ABNY message through @ABetterNY on social media. And with that, I'll pass off the screen to Deputy Borough President Washington. Thanks all.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks to ABNY, thanks to the entire team, to Sarah, Madeline, Laura, everyone at ABNY for putting this together. This is a pretty cool boardroom breakfast. I think this is probably my first boardroom breakfast from my bedroom, so it's exciting. I hope everybody has a bite to eat. Grab something. We just want to have a good time. Incredibly thrilled to have Nick with us today. Nick is a superstar in New York City. Some of his greatest claims to fame are being a husband and a father, and just an all-around great guy. So I'm just glad to have Nick with us, and we're just going to have some fun. Thanks, Sarah, for that introduction. One of my most important things is I'm a native New Yorker, born, bred, and buttered right here in New York City. I'm a kid from East Harlem, so still live in this city, which I love greatly. And, just looking forward to having a good time hearing from Nick. Nick and the Public Advocate have been up to a lot. 2020 has been a fascinating year for every single one of us. So much has happened in this year. I was just over the weekend talking with my wife, and I just said, man, do you remember when we had curfew in New York City? And it's almost out of my head. Everything feels like it was either really a long time ago or just 30 minutes ago. So 2020 has been an interesting year, so we're glad to have Nick here to just share what he's been up to and to talk about his career, his life, what's been going on, and what things he has to share with us. And then we'll jump into a Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we have time for during this morning session. So Nick is just incredibly experienced. This is not his first time working with Jumaane Williams, who is the public advocate. He had his first tour with Jumaane when Jumaane was in the city council as a council member. So this is round two. Nick spent some time working in the de Blasio administration, working on everything. If it was housing, buildings, civil rights, youth development, public safety. Nick has really done it all. Truly is a public servant and somebody who cares deeply and understands the needs of communities and how to address those needs. He also spent some time doing some state work with Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. And Nick joined us all the way from Cal Berkeley. I'm a big fan of the East Bay area, particularly. I'm an Oakland guy. People love San Francisco, but I'm really an Oakland guy. And so I love Oakland. I love the East Bay. It's a great, great place. And so we appreciate you making it all the way here. After graduating from the University of California, Berkeley, Nick went to law school, had his law degree from St. John's University, Red Storm. So we appreciate that love for New York City. And Nick was also named in City and State's 40 Under 40, which of course he was, because he's that good. So Nick has become a good friend over the years, and we're just thrilled to have him here. Nick, thank you for being with us this morning. I appreciate the public advocate seal in your background. The only seal that I have is this S that's right there. That's the first letter of my initials, my wife's first name. S for civic. So
Nice.
you've got the public advocate behind you, and I've got my wife directing me at all times on what I need to do. So I need a lot of direction. But Nick, thanks so much for spending this morning with us. We want to give you the floor, and we can't wait to hear from you. And then we're going to jump into some Q&A afterwards.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And obviously to my friend, Deputy Borough President of Manhattan, Matthew S. Washington. I got you on the S. Thanks for the introduction. I am really excited and thrilled to be here. I've long known about ABNY's work. I've long known about Matthew, your work, and the Borough President of Manhattan, Gail Brewer. You all are just stalwarts in bringing about equity, not only in this borough, but in this city. Gail was a council member and leading on technology issues, and now you all are leading in the borough president's office. And I just want to say we see your work, and we thank you. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about who I am, how I got to this space, and of course, working with our public advocate, Jamani Williams, and the work that we're engaging in as a team. So as Matthew mentioned, I was originally born and raised in Los Angeles, and I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley. And I think in terms of public policy and politics, that all began actually, in Los Angeles. I think back to the year 2000, and there was a certain presidential election that happened that year. The candidates were George Bush, Al Gore, and that was sort of my awakening. I was 15 years old, and I really became awakened when I turned on the news to watch the election results, and the state of Florida came up on the screen, and Peter Jennings and his folks were talking about dimpled chads and hanging chads, and unfortunately how voters of color, particularly Black voters, were being disenfranchised, by the way, by both parties. There were officials in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, both running the state department out there and the county elections offices, and it led to a lot of chaos, confusion. Well, to me, if the franchise and the vote is sacrosanct, why is it that we back then in 2000 were having a struggle over voting rights? And we know that struggle continues with the court stripping out parts of the Voting Rights Act preclearance and that kind of thing. So that was my sort of awakening to government and to politics and equity. Of course, as then a Black young man, and now as a Black man who's now an adult, and I've seen quite a bit in terms of things through the lens of race and equity. That's also a question. Again, why are we struggling for equity when it comes to particularly Black voters? Why are we making it hard for us to vote? So that was the beginning for me. And this is when I really began to find my voice in this game of politics and policy. So immediately I just became hooked. So I was probably the only 15-year-old kid that age who knew what C-SPAN was. I'm sure folks are surprised to hear that. Yes, I would turn on C-SPAN, watch these proceedings, watch the Senate, watch the House, watch the candidates debate, all that stuff at that age. So I knew that would become my career. I didn't know quite where it would land me, but I knew that would be my career path, and it has been. So after I went through, and that was high school. After high school, I did go to UC Berkeley. I majored in political science. And this is where I engaged in policy making for the first time. And it was such a privilege to be able to do it as a college student. Right when I got to campus, I met a council member who was the first openly gay, the most progressive council member in the city of Berkeley, who basically was recruiting students to speak out on and try to resolve some of the issues affecting us back then. And core to it was the issue of housing. We literally, back then in the Bay, had a housing crisis to what we have now in New York City, where students were actually sleeping in the BART, the subway system out there. It's called BART. Why in a city of 120,000, where students make up 30,000, are there students not being able to afford a room or an apartment and having to resort to sleeping in the subway system? That is not hyperbole or exaggeration. So the councilman, Chris Worthington, said, you all need to get involved in city politics now, because even though you're new to the city, you're not new to these issues. And so I met with him. Long story short, he appointed me to what's called the Labor Commission, which out there it's advisory to the city council. So you can recommend laws to the council, and you are engaged with union folks and corporate management trying to resolve labor disputes in that city. So again, very long story short, that was when I got my first experience drafting laws, which has become my career. So we got done a sweatshop-free procurement law, which required the city, when we spend taxpayer dollars, to ensure that there were living wages paid and respect on the job for employees, et cetera. So that was a real education. Left California, moved to New York, and I've been here ever since. As Matthew said, went to law school at St. John's. Knew even in those 3 years that I would re-engage in public policy and politics. And so I've had a couple of roles since then. And I find myself now as First Deputy Public Advocate, assisting our city's public advocate, Jamani Williams, execute his vision. And quickly, when it comes to what is the public advocate, why is the office important, why is it needed? And, during the campaign, we heard a bunch of folks say that the public advocate's office is a waste of money, it's powerless, etc. But if you look at what the quote unquote founders of this office in the '89 charter were thinking, they knew that we had a mayor, a strong mayor. They knew that we had a controller who was responsible for our pension system, protecting our teachers and our firefighters and others in terms of pensions, but there needed to be another office where actually people of color would have an easier chance, so to speak, to win a citywide office. It had been, up until that time, difficult for people of color to win a citywide office. And of course, we had Mayor Deegan's in office and his great record of achievement. But this office was created to ensure that there were a diverse representation at the citywide level. So this office was created in 1989 with the vision of being the city's watchdog, the city's ombudsman. So the goal really is to make sure that where there are centers of power, so in the mayor's office and the deputy mayors and the commissioners, that this office, one, oversees those agencies, those mayoral agencies in terms of their programs, and ensure they're being run effectively and that they are responsive to the people of this city. So that's why the office was created. And so there's been several public advocates, and each one molds the office to her or his vision. This public advocate's vision is to really try to bring about equity. And if we look at what we've seen in recent months, whether it's this devastating COVID-19 crisis, where we see people of color, and that's Black and brown New Yorkers, really being the bulk of the frontline workers, the unfortunate majority in the positive cases, the unfortunate majority of fatalities. And then we shift over to police violence and the murder of George Floyd. And of course, in New York City, unfortunately, the murder of Eric Garner. We see that this office is critical in raising up those issues and trying to push where we can the NYPD, the mayor, the administration writ large, and other powers to move in a direction of equity, to ensure that we stop engaging in excessive use of force that often lead to sometimes fatal encounters. That is the value of this office. And this office has several divisions, and I'll stop all this talking. But we have the public advocate, myself, then we have 5 deputy public advocates who are issue-specific organizers and policy leads. So when it comes to issues of housing or education, school reopenings is a core issue right now, or infrastructure, construction safety remains an issue. When it comes to those key issues, we have 5 deputies that are appointed to lead on those issues. So my role is to help set the vision for the office in collaboration with our public advocate, and to make sure that we are being responsive to the people of the city. So it is a critical office, and we should not get rid of it. We should strengthen the office.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. A lot there that I want to talk about. First, I can't believe at 15 years old you were watching C-SPAN. I think at 15 years old, if I turned on C-SPAN, it was to help me go to sleep, not to consume what was happening. So impressive note. You know, a bunch of things. You talked about the different roles of the deputies and first deputy helping to set the vision for the office. You know, what are the other specific areas that the other deputies are working in? If you can just tell us a little bit more about their roles.
Sure, sure. So when I mentioned the deputy public advocates are organizers and policy leads, I'll give you one core example. We have a census undercount all around this city. So one of our deputy public advocates, Jamela Rose, is the DPA for civic engagement and community empowerment. Her role is to ensure that we double down, and I know ABNY is central on this as well, of the importance of filling out that census. The census means, for example, you know, when we saw the COVID-19 crisis, we saw an issue with hospital beds across the state and including in New York City. Well, if we fill that census out, we literally have the ability to grab more federal dollars from DC and literally build more hospital beds, so that we're in this, if we are in a space of crisis, the money's already in DC, and if we have leadership that is focused on building hospitals and building those beds, we're better able to respond. So civic empowerment is one of the five. We have four others in education, infrastructure, et cetera. So there's 5 DPAs. And I encourage folks to check out our site at advocate.nyc.gov, and that goes into more of the duties of the 5 issue area DPAs.
Awesome, thank you very much. And I also want to thank Laura for putting a link in for the 2020 census. It's important. Clearly, First Deputy Public Advocate Nick E. Smith, and the team are working on the census. It's important. Fill it out. Encourage your friends to do that. Let's get it done. Nick, I wanted to jump back to your early days of politics. You know, when you realized in the year 2000, a lot of things were happening, and you know, you said that you felt like Black people were being disenfranchised by both parties. We're 2 decades later. How do you feel about the role of Black people and how each party is responding to the Black community with everything going on? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, you know, what Black folks in this country have, you know, we are incredibly strong people, amazing culture, amazing record of accomplishment in every area of life, but we still face systemic inequities and racism virtually in every area of life, whether it's housing, we continue to see segregation and redlining and lack of access to mortgages, whether it's education, where many of us attend underperforming schools because in part those schools are historically underfunded, and we can look at what's called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity as recent court activity acknowledging that disparity, and it's up to our Okay, I think we're back. I think we had a quick break. That continues to be a problem for Black folks. So our office, we're committed to really, one, raising the issues of systemic inequity, and then secondarily, where we can through legislation.
All right.
really assisting Black folks and people of color, and any disenfranchised people in our society. So we've got so much more to do in all of those areas, Matthew.
Thank you. And we lost a little bit of that. We had lost a signal. I thought you were just letting us wait for the punchline. They say patience makes the heart grow fonder. So I've developed quite the fondness.
I can actually, yeah, no, Matthew, I can repeat the point. I'm sorry the signal screwed up there, but the point is no party is doing what we got to do to break down those systemic inequities. We've all got to be committed to what the late John Lewis called good trouble, pushing and pulling wherever we can, and using what tools we have, whether it's legislation, whether it's persuading a mayoral agency to change a rule or regulation, or whether it's organizing on the ground to get people to speak out. Folks may know that, may have seen that during the protests against police violence, that the public advocate led a march across the Brooklyn Bridge, which was very successful. And the point of that was not just to call out those inequities and police violence against people of color. And I would point out, including Black trans women as people in our society who are just disadvantaged in our society. We got to really call those things out. So the point wasn't just to call those things out. The point was to push for systemic change. And I think we're in the middle of that. And so as the Public Advocate's Office, Matthew, we're actually pushing for a legislation to turn the page on all those things. We just passed the Right to Record Act, which codifies the First Amendment right to record police activity from a safe space, but also sets ground rules in the law so to make sure that if I observe or if you observe a police encounter, you and I can record that from a safe space. And the law now says an officer cannot stop that recording unless there's a real reason to put it in layman's terms. So we're using, Matthew, the tools that this office has, including legislation, to chip away at those systemic inequities. And I'm thrilled to be on the team with our team and our public advocate, pushing every single day to make those things happen.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And that legislation, we'll be watching that, as it goes forward. And thank you. It's one of the things when you talk about the role of the public advocate, people don't always remember that the public advocate, although not a legislator, can introduce legislation to really be active on the needs of the people. And so thank you for using that authority to address concerns that our community is having. You know, Nick, as you were talking and started, one of the things you talked about were schools and access to schools, and how schools are such an important component of equity for all people. You know, the public advocate has put out his plan. You guys have put out your plan on school reopening, pushing it back to October. Can you talk a little bit more about your school plan, how you came to that plan and what you think it will do to address the needs of all students and families to ensure equity in education and successful educational outcomes for our students?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And it's interesting. So when I see these headlines about school reopening, it reminds me that in just a couple of years, I'll be thinking about the same thing because I am the dad of Grace and Faith Smith, two twin girls. So although my girls aren't quite old enough to go to school yet, I'm thinking about it. So there's a personal hook there as well. But yes, so we recently put out a white paper on our recommendations for school reopenings. And let's bring it back to basics. When we make public policy and we make moves in government, it's important to make sure that we are protecting first and foremost the most vulnerable in our population. And that includes our city's young people. If we look at the federal level, we have a president who is almost hell-bent on reopening for the purpose of the dollar, the economy, and making sure that the economy keeps moving. And that's a political point of view. But if you're really talking about the health and safety of our young people, the question isn't really how fast we move to a reopening. The question really is, where are we on positive COVID-19 cases? And are we at a place where we feel confident that sending our young people back into school will not cause any unreasonable risk to them. And so what we've seen is, on the one hand, sort of what's the phrase? I'll just use this, a disagreement, just to say it gently, between the governor and the mayor. And for transparency, yes, I worked for the mayor for a couple of years, but we've seen some disagreement there on the whole process, whether or not the mayor has the power to reopen schools, the governor has the power. Parents don't care about that disagreement. They want clear guidance as to the health and safety of their children. So our white paper, the message is very clear. We can't rush this reopening. We should be reopening our schools, but we've got to implement both a in-person and a virtual hybrid system. So if we don't get to a place where cases go down and it's safe to bring school students back, we've got to go virtual. But right now, the white paper calls for a hybrid, the option of in-person or virtual schooling, and starting with our younger students, because the science says, and science is always changing, but we feel confident enough in the thinking that if we phase the reopening and we just start with allowing our older students to go to school from home, and potentially allowing some of our younger students to re-enter the schools at some point in the future, possibly October, then that is a great way of phasing in our reopening of the schools. But even before that, though, there's some critical steps that need to happen. Just today, there was news that out of 1,500 school buildings, about 680 of them, I think, have faulty ventilation systems. Well, DOE needs time to fix those vent systems because people need clean air to breathe, particularly because of the possibility that some of our young people may go back to a school and have COVID-19. So we need time to fix our school's infrastructure and to hire additional staff. There's concern with our teachers' unions, there's concern with our faculty, and of course our students and us in government about reopening, and that is a part and parcel of it. So the white paper says, let's not focus on a September arbitrary deadline because that's traditionally when schools open. Let's make sure that we spend the time to get these tools in place. And that includes, by the way, Matthew, making sure that we have childcare options for parents when we reopen our schools. And that should run in tandem with our parents going back to work. We don't want our parents going back to work and them having no options for childcare. So those are critical pillars of the white paper, and we look forward to working with the mayor and DOE and our partners in the council to make that happen.
Thank you for that. And, as we talk about sort of reopening schools and other things and making sure parents have access to healthcare, we can all see that you're in your office. So how is the public advocate's office addressing reopening, getting back into the office, and, what's happening just on the home front for you guys?
Yeah, I love the question. So back in March when we didn't know really what COVID-19 was, that is in its scope and scale, we actually took pretty decisive action and implemented a work from home policy. We were one of the first city agencies to do so because, again, our goal number one is to protect the health and safety of our team. So that's something we did very quickly. And we also called for the closing down of our city schools. It turns out that sometimes things get delayed, but we were out very early on that. And eventually our colleagues in government caught up to that. But I think, and it's funny because I was on a panel a few weeks ago and someone said, well, Nick, you bringing that up sounds like nothing more than Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm not sure that makes the most sense, where we saw some of the science, even though it was a moving target, but we took decisive action to protect our team. And so when we talk about your question about reopening, we're going to look at the science. It isn't about rushing back into the physical space. Our team is online. We're taking complaints about city services as we are charter mandated to do. We are responding to the issues that the people bring to us, and the public advocates agenda, and we are on the job. So at some point in the future, yes, we'll reopen the physical office, but we've been on the job every single day since COVID-19 began. And our team takes pleasure in doing so because we all are in public service to assist 8.5 million people of this city.
Awesome, thank you. I want to shift a little bit, but also really talking about, supporting businesses. We do have a question from Eric McFadden, and I think it's an interesting one. So let me just read the question. What is the public advocate doing to assist the Black-owned New York City-based IT firms in accessing goods and services contracts from Do It and other mayoral agencies? The city's contracts with CDWG and SHI are barriers to NYC-based Black-owned IT businesses. How do you respond to that? What are your thoughts on this, Nick?
It is a good question. And so let me first say, businesses overall are experiencing a real crisis, I think, due to COVID-19. We're well aware of the expense of starting a small business alone and then running that small business where taxes are high and there's just so many literal expenses like water, lights, payroll, et cetera. So we get that we're in a real crisis. So our goal is to make sure that our businesses, and particularly our Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, are able to start their businesses and thrive. But the reality is, yes, we're in a crisis. And you mentioned IT and city contracts. A few years ago, one of our colleagues, the controller, did a study about small businesses in the city and MWBEs in particular, and of course that includes Black-owned, and showed that out of $20 billion in contracts, and that's prime contracts and subcontracts, $1 billion went to MWBE. And then when we parse that out, a lot of that is the W, women-owned businesses, which is, of course, a fantastic thing. But in that MWBE is the letter M, focusing on minority and Black-owned businesses. And so I took a look actually pretty recently at the MWBE goals and see that there's something called Local Law 1 of 2013, sponsored by then Speaker Quinn. And that increased goals for contracting, again, both prime contracts and subcontracts. And although that was increased, our office is interested in looking at those goals again. There's a legal issue with mandating a percent, but we're interested in looking at those goals again and seeing if we can increase those goals, and that includes Black businesses. And it's not just a citywide goal we should be looking at, but we should be looking at each city agency that also individually engages in prime and subprime contracts. So you mentioned Do It and IT contracts for Black-owned businesses, like the one you own to the questioner. Yeah, we're looking into that, and I would like you to, if you don't mind, get in touch with us so we can get more on those. I think you mentioned 2 vendors. I want to hear more about it, so we can look into it. But I will say it's critical for our office to push on increasing the Black-owned businesses that are starting up, and of course, those that are getting contracts from the city. And I get your point. Budgets are moral documents, and you're talking about spending taxpayer dollars. And so we've got to be about the business of making sure that groups that have been historically disenfranchised and left out of the economic boom receive more of those contracts. So we will be doing some more work on this issue, and please stay in touch with me on that topic.
Excellent, thank you for that. You know, the public advocate, and certainly you guys have been huge advocates against gun violence in the city, especially around the 4th of July. We saw a significant increase in shootings around the city. It was sort of what was being reported in the news. You know, so what's happening? You know, what specific things are you all working on to decrease gun violence, stop the influx of illegal weapons and other things? So, you know, what's happening with gun violence right now?
Yeah, this is obviously a challenging topic. When we talk about gun violence, we can't just talk about this in terms of statistics and numbers. Every life lost and every person injured that's, a human being that is no longer walking around to contribute to our society. So that's our starting point. And, the public advocate has been working on this issue for many years, as have I, with him. And it saddens me just to see the incidents of gun violence that plague our city. And, I know that we see spikes in the summer, and, we've got to do something about it. And we know some of the solutions, but if this were easy to solve, it would have been solved long ago. We look at this in the two parts. We look at this in terms of the supply of guns, which you mentioned, in terms of gun violence, and then the demand for gun violence. On the supply side, that's more of a federal and state issue to resolve. We know that a lot of the guns that are in the city and that wind up on our streets not manufactured here in New York City. They come up the I-95 corridor from states that have more lax gun regulation. And we know, we talk a lot about the Second Amendment for a well-regulated militia, by the way. And the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have reasonable restrictions on the availability and the tracking of guns. And so we need the Congress and the state, but particularly the Congress, in terms of a federal, a national landscape, to do a much better job, pass additional gun regulations that help track these guns, that remove the liability that gun manufacturers currently have if someone wants to sue them over gun violence. And that law was passed, unfortunately, the last 10 to 12 years at the federal level. We need the federal government to do that. And I'm hopeful that if there's a change in the government in the next few months, that we'll have a president and a Congress that will adopt that legislation. At the state level, similar deal, better landscape, but still more to do. We passed the New York SAFE Act in New York, actually 2 rounds of gun regulation, where we implemented, for example, safe storage, et cetera. And those are good acts. And that gets to the supply side. There's more to do there. But our public advocate talks about supply and demand. And demand means, what are the root causes of people wanting to pick up a gun? No one inherently wants to pick up a deadly weapon and use it against a fellow human being. There's usually some reason that they do so, whether it's a mental health issue or whether it's a lack of resources and just feeling like there's hopelessness and they're stuck in a cycle of poverty. There's no access to jobs. And if you don't have a job, it's hard to take care of families. That's why people sometimes pick up that gun and use it. So it's important for us to recognize that there are people here that we're talking about, and we've got to address the root causes, so the social conditions of gun violence. And gun violence is a health issue. So we got to reframe when we talk about gun violence. It is a health issue. It isn't, just a issue for the penal codes and a crime. It's a health issue. So some of the tools and the solutions that we see that have been effective, and I got to give all praises to these New Yorkers. There's what's called the Crisis Management System, CMS, which is New York City's version of Cure Violence that comes out of Chicago and it comes out of Boston. This theory is you have peers who may have themselves engaged in gun violence at some point in their lives that are turning their lives around and that want to engage our young people and show them a different way, a different path. And so we have about, I think the number now is $30+ million that the public advocate, Councilman Cabrera, and 2 just superstars, Erica Ford of Life Camp in Queens, A.T. Mitchell, Brooklyn, Aisha Sekou, Harlem, and a bunch of Cure Violence or CMS providers that are on the ground engaging our young people. One of the most successful models that we've seen. And if you look at, for example, Erica's group Life Camp out in Southeast Queens, you will see in her catchment area, there was about a year span that in her catchment area, there were no reported shooting incidents for a calendar year. Let me say that again. In Erica's catchment area, no reported shootings for a calendar year. That's because of those violence interrupters that are in the streets talking to young people. That is because, which the public advocate and then council member Fredetas and council member Eugene and the speaker, Mark Viverito, pushed for, which is summer jobs as well. So you don't only have peers on the streets, but we fought and got additional SYP summer job slots. We have crisis counseling in our schools, particularly middle schools, to, again, help show our young people a better way. So the CMS system is one of the most significant models in addressing and reducing the demand for gun violence. But I don't want to go on too long, but this is very important for our office and for our city. So that's one solution. But let's also talk about poverty and jobs and wages. Even when we do have a job, we don't earn enough wages to support our families. That is a core issue. New York City has some of the highest cost of living in any city in the country, and it's incumbent upon those of us in government to, one, recognize that and do what we can to increase the take-home pay of our residents. And so the earlier question that talked about city contracts and prime contracts and some contracts, even with those, we got to make sure that when we contract with our MWBE entities, that we're ensuring that they pay, that they're able to, one, start up and maintain, that they're also paying their employees when they can, wages that are commensurate with the living wage. So the gun violence issue is a complicated, a tough one, but we see some of the models. Let's expand CMS. Let's make sure that our young people have jobs and schools that have after-school programming, and getting to, again, the root cause. And I think if we focus squarely on that, if we put all hands on deck, we will see a reduction of gun violence, even in places like the summer, where we historically see a spike, which we are unfortunately experiencing now. But that's what we got to do as a city, as a state, and as the federal government. And I know we can do it. I'm optimistic about reducing gun violence in our city.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And clearly it's a passion. A lot of work has gone into this by you and the team. You know, as you talked about young people, making sure, you know, they are employed and have opportunities, you know, as we think about gun violence and its association with economics, there seems to be a clear correlation. So, what are you doing to encourage and support young entrepreneurs, young people who are interested in working and just sort of getting out there with their ideas and breathing life into them and encouraging innovation in youth?
Yeah, I think this is also a two-parter. I think one is making sure that our young entrepreneurs, particularly of color, know that you can do it. This is, in fact, to use a tired cliche, but it's true, the land of opportunity. And when you have an idea, particularly, and again, the question earlier mentioned IT, when you have an idea, don't think that because it requires finances and startup money and seed money that you can't do it. There are what's called accelerators and incubators in our city that are specifically dedicated towards ensuring that New Yorkers, including young people, young entrepreneurs, can start those businesses. There is a city agency called SBS, and that there are partners with entrepreneurs and communicating those resources and helping you see through the process. So again, on the messaging alone, our entrepreneurs and young people should know that there are resources available to help you incorporate your entity. So for example, chartering your company as an LLC or whatever legal form you need, explain to you what legal resources exist to help you do that, finding seed money, and there's some nonprofit seed money, there's some government seed money. These tools exist. It's literally a matter of making sure that entrepreneurs are aware of the opportunities. And I know that ABNY is part and parcel of helping bring about awareness. So we would love to keep working with ABNY, our partners in SBS, incubators and accelerators to make sure that we help our entrepreneurs start up and thrive. And I mentioned earlier the issue of costs. We want to know from you. Part of our job is to listen and to help resolve. So tell us, tweet us, email us, get on the phone with us. Let us know what are the pressures that you face as an entrepreneur when it comes to startup, when it comes to procuring space, when it comes to keeping your space, that's rent. let us know those pressures so we can help push and pull. There's a bill in the council called the Small Business Justice Survivor Act. That's not our bill, but that's I think that's it was Councilmember Chen. I forget who has it now, but that bill is dedicated to making sure that when you are in a space, renting a space, that you have an easier time negotiating your lease renewal with the landlord. So again, there are so many tools available. It's about communicating it, and we want to do that in our office, and we will continue to do so. And that's a fantastic question, Matthew.
Awesome. Was not original question. Somebody submitted, but Nick, so much has been happening, you know, as we think about the country with, you know, COVID-19, we think about, as you talked about, the murder of George Floyd and others. We've got, you know, so much happening in this country across the globe that's sort of got people fired up, and people are frustrated, understandably so, with what's happening in the world or what hasn't been happening. You know, are there any, you know, good pieces of legislation or good ideas that are coming out in this city or across the country that you think we should be paying attention to and trying to get behind and supporting during this time?
Absolutely. And I don't think we, on this question, should be reinventing the wheel. There are so many advocate groups across the country that includes Black Lives Matter that are very clear on what we got to be doing federally, state level, and locally to respond to this crisis. There are so many groups responding to COVID-19 as well. And I'll just touch on the federal landscape first, and then I'll talk about state and local, particularly when it comes to police violence. You know, I'm also fed up. I'm sick and tired of turning on the TV and seeing people of color, that's Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, other people of color, and again, including Black trans women being shot down in the street at the hands of, quote, the state government, police departments across the country. There are so many issues with bias in our police departments, and we often hear response police chiefs across the country saying, yes, we get that there's an issue. We have changed our training to increase implicit bias training, etc. But let's be clear, that is not enough. If implicit bias training would have been enough, we wouldn't see these repeat incidents. We need to reimagine what public safety means. That is what Black Lives Matter have said very clearly, and it's up to us in government to execute the vision of what people on the ground, people who look like us, you and Matthew, are saying. So for example, use of force. Departments across the country often don't have a codified use of force standard, and therefore we often see excessive use of force based on a patrol guide or training. We need, as a first preliminary step, to codify a standard, uniform use of force standard so that it's clear, it's in writing, and it's the law. But that goes into PD-specific practices, and there are a bunch of those, which we can also unpack. But more broadly, when we talk about reimagining public safety, it's divest, invest. It's making sure that we don't spend all of our money on police itself, because that doesn't get to the root cause of the issues that we face. We can't police our way out of poverty. We can't police our way out of crumbling public schools. We can't police our way out of the social ills that face us. For example, mental health. This is another example of what we're calling for. When we have a mental health crisis, why are we sending people who have a dark blue uniform, a badge, and a gun, and maybe a warrant, maybe not? In the case of Breonna Taylor, that was a mental health case. That was a no-knock warrant, but the example was apt. Why are we sending people to those police to those calls? Why do we think that that's illogical? When we send a police officer to a mental health call, that's probably going to exacerbate the tension because it's a mental health call. People are experiencing a crisis, and the last thing they need is to look up and see someone with a gun in their face. There's a gentleman named Kowalski Trawick who was killed in the middle of a mental health crisis. Deborah Danner was killed in the middle of a mental health crisis. Dwayne June in Brooklyn, killed in the middle of a mental health crisis. We've got to shift the model from a police response to a peer response. Let's send peers or trained social worker, trained violence reduction folks into those calls to engage in the social work that we need. This is a matter of resources. So when we talk about reimagining public safety, that's a part of it. That's a piece of it. Let's stop sending police to these mental health calls. Let's fund our public schools. Let's ensure that we have sufficient summer jobs for our young people. Let's ensure that, as was asked earlier, that entrepreneurs don't feel so frustrated about the idea of high taxes, high rent, et cetera. Let's chip away at those things. That way, we're not sending the police in to solve all these problems. That isn't right. And I think we're moving in that direction. I will say the public advocate himself and our team working on a bill that would shift the model from a police response to mental health calls to a peer-centered response. So I'm proud of that. But we got to reimagine what public safety is at the federal, state, and local levels. And I talked already about peer violence. We got to fund peer violence, the CMS system. That's another piece of it.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to remind anyone, if you had a quick question that you wanted to throw in, please throw that in the chat. Nick, with so much going on in the world, you know, and thinking about the future, I just want to share one of my favorite pictures. You might recognize
wow.
this. For those who don't know.
You got me listening. Okay. You got me. I didn't expect this. Yeah. So, folks, this is a picture from July 23rd. My daughters, Grace and Faith, turned 1 year old. So I love that, Matthew. We had a birthday party, a socially distanced, safe birthday party for Grace and Faith. And it was a great time. And I'll tell you, Matthew, those two little girls give me and my partner Tiffany are just an amazing amount of hope. Again, they're not one. And every day, I see new things. You know, what they've started to do now is they've begun to wave. So it's the cutest thing. Those two girls give me hope, and they are the reason why I do what I do. I know I have a certain love for public policy. They only remind me why I do this work. And I love that you printed that picture out. And it's a fun one. And by the way, I got to say, that image is a cartoon, actually. There's a cartoon that we try to get them to watch called Akili and Me. And
Up, Nick, you got muted. Hey, Nick, you're muted.
Oh, I think I was muted. You got me, Matthew. You got me.
You know, I figured it was important to pull that one out because, you know, ultimately the work that you're doing in public service, it's about families, and families are important. Your girls were born in 2019, and in the year 2020, the world changed, and certainly you're thinking about their future and how their future is impacted by everything that's happening. But it's a beautiful picture of you representing your beautiful girls. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being a good father.
Thank you for putting that picture out.
Yeah. It's a good one. You know, I think to wrap up, I just want to ask this. You know, this is a young professionals moment, and just wanted to get your thoughts and your push. You know, what advice would you give to young professionals who are interested in being more civically engaged, or, you know, engaged in different ways? You know, what are those final thoughts, that final advice recommendation as we look towards the future of our own professions and trying to make our city a much better place?
I'm 35 years old. Obviously, I grew up in this country looking at a lot of the beauties of our country. It's not all dour. I think, you know, there's just such life is an amazing thing, and it's not to take it, be taken for granted. But and it's also important to be of a life of service to each other. And in that process, it's important to find your niche and find your voice. And the public advocate's life, my life, Matthew, your life as the deputy borough president of Manhattan, and again, kudos to you and your work in the BP's office. It's about us finding our station in life. For me, it happens to be using whatever skills I have to change public policy. So once we find our niche and station, pursue it. I know how challenging it is when you're sitting at home with a computer looking for a job. And if you're interested, for example, politics and policy, how difficult you may think it is to find a role that works for you. Don't be dissuaded from it. You can and will find success. Just be persistent and dedicated. None of us are perfect. The road, the road is not a straight line. There will always be twists and turns in life, but it can and will be done with optimism, with faith, and with education, be informed, and with again, persistence. So to young people, young professionals that are on this call, keep at it, keep up. Whatever you find that you're good at, pursue it, learn more about it. Talk to peers who are in the field. Although I have a certain level of expertise when it comes to policy, I don't know everything. And so I myself learn every day about new issues, about nuance, about stats, about what affects us. We all learn every day. So I would say be persistent, progressive, be open to saying, I don't know. Be aware that you don't know everything. I don't. Sometimes you'll make the wrong move. Mistakes happen in life. But again, pursue it, because at the end of the day, that's the most you can ask for. And I think in terms of karma, if you put out good energy into the universe, it will come back in terms of success. That's what I would advise my peers who are on the call, Matthew.
That's awesome. Thanks, Nick. And my advice would be to just follow Nick and we'll be all right. I really want to thank First Deputy Public Advocate Nikki Smith for taking some time this morning just to share his life and some other things that he's done, and be surprised by a picture of him with his girl's t-shirt on. I can't thank ABNY enough, to Laura, Madeline, Sarah, John, the whole team for making this happen. Certainly to our attendees, we saw some superstars in there like Angela Pinsky, some friends like Jonathan Bing and Lisa George. So thank you all for joining us today. Continue to hang out with ABNY. Much thanks to the Young Professionals group. Glad to be a part of it. And I'm going to send it back to Sarah so she can wrap things up. But thank you all for letting me moderate and have this fun chat with Nick this morning. So enjoy the day, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, ABNY. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, team. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Matthew, and so much, Nick. That was so enlightening and frankly inspiring. And we're so lucky to have you this morning. And thank you. This was great.